What is up, guys? Welcome to Barden. My name is Heinrich. Today we're going to take a look at how we can make our enemy attack our player. So where we last left off, we gave our enemy the ability to detect our player. So if he turns and he sees us, he'll detect us, and then he'll charge at us, like that. Now we want to make it so that when the enemy gets close to the player, he will try to attack the player. So let's take another look at the state machine diagram that I made. I've made some updates to it. So again, here we can see all the transitions we need between the different states. We currently have our idle state, moving state, player detected state, charge state, and our look for player state. So before we move on with the attack player state, I think we should just go back through all these states and make sure we have all these transitions set up. So let's go to Unity. And let's go to our enemies folder, enemy specific folder, Enemy1. And let's just make sure all of these are open. Okay, so we have our E1 player detected state, charge state, look for player state, idle state, move state. Okay, we have all of our states. Let's start with the move state. So in the move state, we have a transition to our idle state and to our player detected state. So here we have player detected and idle. Okay, so that's done. In our idle state, move state, player detected state. Okay, we're good there. Then from our player detected state, we have a transition to our charge player state, or we have a transition to our look for player state or attack player state. So from player detected, we currently have a transition to our charge state and our look for player state. So let's just, while we're here, just to make sure we don't forget to add this transition later, put in a little to-do reminder for ourselves. Like that. Okay, and that should be it for the player detected state. Now in the charge player state, we have a transition back to player detected state, or we have a transition to look for player state, or we have a transition to attack player state. So in the charge state, we currently have a transition to look for player state, or we have a transition to our player detected state. Boom, boom, so we're good there. Now I just need one to go to our attack state. So let's just add a comment for that as well. Like that. And then in our look for player state, we have a transition either to our player detected state or our move state. So look for player, and we have both of those. Okay, so all our transitions are good now. So we are ready to work on our attack state. So how we're going to handle attacking is going to be very similar to how we're handling it on the player so far. So in our player combat controller, let's go take a look at that. When we attack, we have a function called check attack hitbox that gets called by the attack animation that sets off a physics 2D overlap circle check to see if there's any enemies in a radius at a certain position. And then we store all those enemies and then we damage all those enemies. So we're going to be doing the same thing for the enemy attacks. So what we'll have is we'll have an attack state that inherits from state, but then we're going to think ahead and think, okay, what kind of attacks do we want? Well, for now, we want a melee attack that the enemy has, but we know that later on we're going to add a ranged enemy that shoots a bow. So maybe we also want a ranged attack. So instead of attack being our main attack state, we will make two more classes that both inherit from attack. That'll be our melee attack and ranged attack states that will take care of doing the different things that are different between melee attacks and ranged attacks. So for instance, a melee attack is going to set off a check to see if there's any enemies in a certain radius, whereas a ranged attack is going to take care of spawning a projectile instead. Another thing we need to do is, seeing as our attacks get triggered by the animation, but our animation is not on the same game object as our script, we're going to have to make another script that will allow us to interact with our states from our animations. So let's just start off by creating the attack script. So let's go back to our enemies folder and then into our states folder, and then we'll create a new C# script that will just call attack state, like that. We can then open it up in Visual Studio And then we can start off by just deleting all of this pre-generated code and getting rid of mono behavior and making it inherit from state instead. So like I just said, attack state is going to be our base attack class, where our different attacks will inherit from this. So let's think about what every single attack, no matter what, needs to have. Well, every attack is going to need to have some sort of position, be it melee or ranged. With a melee attack, we need to know where the center of the damage is. So we have a position and we're going to check a certain radius around that position for any enemies. But a ranged attack also needs a position, but in this case, it's going to be a spawn position where we want to spawn the projectile. So seeing as that is something that both melee and ranged combat has, we can declare it in our attack state. So we'll start off by saying protected, and we'll just save it as a transform. And I'm just going to call it attack position. So unlike our other classes, we're not going to be having a reference to a data class in this class. Instead, we'll have separate ones for our melee and range attack classes. So for now, we can just take care of setting up the constructor. So we can click on attack state, say control full stop, generate constructor. And now seeing as our attack position is going to be a child game object of our alive game object, we probably want to pass it through with our constructor. So let's add it to the constructor. Transform attack position, and then inside the constructor we say this dot attack position equals attack position, like that. And now next we can just generate our overrides. We can click on attack state, and if control full stop is not working for you, I think pressing alt enter also does the same thing. This is all going to be different based on what editor you're using. But this is how you do it in Visual Studio 2019. Okay, so let's just generate the overrides. And again, we don't want equals, get hash, or toString. Like that. Okay, before we head on with the different attack states, let's work on getting the enemy to know when to attack. So if you'll remember in the last episodes, I talked about having a long range action and a short range action. So for most enemies, the melee attack is going to be their short range action. So let's head to our entity script. And we're just going to write another check function, like these check player in min aggro range functions. And this time we're just going to write a function that checks to see if the player is in range of our close range action. So we'll come and we'll say public virtual bool, and we'll call it check player in close range action. Like that. And now in the function, we're just going to return a physics2d.raycast again. But first we need to go back to our entity data class and specify the distance we want to check for. So let's go to our d_entity and let's define a close range action distance. So public float close range action distance. And we'll just set it equal to 1 by default. Back in entity, we can now say return physics2d.raycast, and again we'll fire the ray from our player check.position in the alive game object.transform.right direction, and we're going to use entity data.close range action distance as our distance, and entity data.whatisPlayer as our layer mask. Cool, so now we have a function that we can use to check if our player is close enough to our enemy to get attacked. So if we go to our state diagram, we can now see we have two states where we can attack our player from, either our player detected state or our charge player state. So let's start off with our player detected state. So let's go to our base player detected state class. And when I say base, I mean, so not the enemy specific one. And so now in this state, we can do another check to see if the player is close enough to get attacked. So as you can see, we already have a perform long range action. So let's just use this convention and say perform short range action. So protected bool perform short range action, like that. And now we can just add this to our doChecks function. We'll just come and say perform short range action equals entity.checkPlayer close range action. So it would appear I have messed up my naming convention again. Let's just fix that. Okay, so check player in close range action, and here I'm saying short range. Let's change this to close range instead. So just click on it and press Ctrl R twice, and we'll just change it to close range. Like that. Okay, so now in our player detected state, we will know when the player is close enough to be attacked. So now we just need to go to our E1 player detected state to make the transition to the attack state. But we have not yet made the attack state, so we'll leave that for later. Now let's go to our charge player state, and we can do the exact same thing. So we'll just find our charge state. And then again, we can create another protected bool that we'll call perform close range action. Like that, and then just add it to our doChecks function. So perform close range action equals entity dot check player in close range action, like that. Cool, so now in both our charge state and our player detected state, we should be able to go and transition to our attack state once we've created it. Okay, so let's start looking at the attacks again. So like I said earlier, all of our attacks usually get triggered by an animation at some point. So like when we have a melee attack, we only trigger the damage at a certain part. So when the character swings the sword, only once he swings the sword do we actually check to see if there's any enemies that should take damage. So another thing that all of our attack states should have is a trigger attack and finish attack functions. Now these functions are specifically there to get called by the animations. So let's just come to the bottom of our state and let's create a public virtual void that we'll call trigger attack. And we're not actually going to put anything in this function here. We just want to know that all attack states have this function. And I'll tell you why we put it here in just a second. And then next we want another public virtual void. And this function we're going to call finish attack. Like that. So the trigger attack function is going to get called at the part of the animation where we're supposed to do damage or where we're supposed to like fire the projectile. And finish attack gets called at the end of the animation, and that's how our attack state is going to know that the attack is done, and then we can transition to another state. So let's just come back up to our variables and let's create a protected boolean. And we'll just call it is animation finished. And then in our enter function, we'll just set that to false. Like that. And then in our finish attack function, we'll set that to true. So is animation finished equals true. Like that. So now our next problem is, how do we call these functions from our animations? When we did it on our player, if we come to our animation window and then go to our attack 1 animation, you can see we have these different animation events in our animation. So this one, as you can see, calls our check attack hitbox function. And the reason we can do this is because our animator is on the same game object as our script. So we have our player, here are our scripts, here's our animator. So they can directly communicate with each other. But in the case of our enemy, our script is sitting on our Enemy1 game object, but our animator is sitting on our alive game object. So they cannot interact with each other. If we add an animation event to any of our animations, we cannot call any of the functions from Enemy1. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to create another script that we can put on our alive game object that is just going to relay messages from our animations to our states. So let's come back to our project view and then go to our scripts folder. And I'm not quite sure where this script should go yet, so we'll just leave it in our base scripts folder. So we'll say create new C# script, and I'm just going to call it animation to state machine. Like that, as we're going to use it to take messages from our animation to our state machine. So let's go ahead and open this up. And this script is going to be very simple. We can go ahead and delete this code. And this time it needs to inherit from mono behavior as we want to put this script on our game object. So this script is going to need two functions, the same two functions as in our states, our trigger attack and finish attack functions. So we'll say private void trigger attack, like that, and then private void finish attack, like that. No E. Okay, so in order for these functions to be able to call the functions from our attack state, we need to have a reference to our attack state. So let's create a public attack state variable that we'll just call attack state, like that. And then what we're going to do is in our trigger attack function, we'll just say attack state dot trigger attack, like that. And then in our finish attack state, we'll just say attack state dot finish attack, just like that. Now what makes this so awesome is we can have lots of different types of attacks with different code in the trigger attack and finish attack, but we only need one of these scripts attached to the game object, and it'll be able to call these functions from any type of attack, be it melee or range, maybe magic in the future, because our attack state base class already has these two functions. So now the last thing we need to do is we need to set this attack state reference. What we're going to do is when we enter an attack state, we set this reference to that attack. So first we need to get a reference to this Enemy1 state machine script somewhere. And seeing as all enemies are going to have this, we might as well do this in our entity class as well. So it's going to be the same as these components that we have here. So let's declare a public Enemy1 state machine variable, and we'll just call it ATSM. And then we'll create the public getter and the private setter, like that. And now in our start function, we can get the reference to that component. So we'll say ATSM equals a live game object dot get component, and the type of the component is Enemy1 state machine, like that. So now that entity has a reference to this script, we can come back to our attack state, and then in the enter function, we can say entity.atsm, seeing as we have a public getter for it, then we say dot attack state equals this. So from now on, whenever we enter an attack state and the attack animation plays, when it calls the trigger attack and finish attack functions, it'll know exactly which state to come to. Now before we move on to our melee attack state class, let's just set our velocity to 0 in the enter function. So entity.setVelocity 0f. Let's head back to Unity, and let's come back to our enemies and states folder, and let's create a new C# script that we'll call melee attack state. And let's open it up in Visual Studio. So we can start off by getting rid of this code again, and then we can inherit from attack state instead of state. Now this time we're going to have data for this state. So we should actually come back to Unity and go to our data folder and then create a new C# script that's going to be d_melee attack, like that. We can go ahead and open that up as well. In our melee attack state class, we can then create our protected d_melee attack variable that we'll call state data. And then we can generate the constructor, like that. And then we can add the data to our constructor. So, comma, d_melee attack called state data. And then inside the constructor, we say this dot state data equals state data, like that. And now we can go ahead and create the function overrides. So control full stop, generate overrides, untick the first 3, click OK, and now we should have everything we need. So now what we need to do is come to our trigger attack function and write the code that's actually going to detect if the player can get damaged. So we'll come and we'll have an array of collider 2Ds, like that, and we'll call it detected objects. And we'll set this equal to physics2d dot overlap circle all, And the position is going to be our attack position dot position. And the radius of attack we need to go and declare in our data class. So let's come and get rid of this code, turn it into a scriptable object. So we'll have a public float attack radius. By default, let's set it equal to 0.5. Don't forget your F. Then back here, we can come and say state data dot attack radius. And then our layer mask, we should also come and set in our data class. So we'll have a public layer mask, and we'll just call it what is player. So we can come and add that as our layer mask, state data dot what is player, like that. So now when our animation triggers our attack, we're going to create that circle and see if our player is inside of that circle. Now to damage the player, we need to loop through everything that gets detected. So we'll say for each, and you can just hit tab to autocomplete. And so we'll say for each collider2D called collider in detected objects, pass the message that it has been damaged. So collider.transform.sendMessage, and the function we're calling is damage. And then we need to pass it our attack details, which we have not yet created. So attack details is going to be something that I'm going to change once again, because I've been doing it in a really stupid way. So if we come look at our player combat controller script, and we look at our attack details, you can see attack details is currently an array of floats that is of size 2, where the 0th element represents our damage or our position, I can't remember, and then the other element represents the other one. So this is a bad way of doing it, because now if we want to make a change to attack details, we have to go change it everywhere. So instead of doing it this way, we're going to use a struct. We're going to create our own data type that is going to hold all the information for an attack. So let's come back to Unity, and in our scripts folder, let's create another folder that we'll just call structs. Open that up, and then inside of it create a new C# script that we'll call attack details, like that. If we open that up, we can get rid of all this pre-generated code and get rid of the inheritance. And now instead of it being a public class, we're going to change class to struct. And that is how we create a new struct. Now inside of here, we can declare everything we need. So now instead of storing our X position as a float, we can just store the position of the thing doing the damage as a vector2. So we can say public vector2, and we'll just call it position, like that. And then we can have our damage amount, so public float damage amount, like that. So now if we come to our melee attack state, let's create our attack details. So at the top, we can just declare another protected, and then we can just call the class name like that, so attack details, and we'll just call it attack details, like that. So now we just need to set these different variables in our attack details. So we need to know what our damage is. So we'll just come back to our melee attack data class and declare the damage of the attack. So public float attack damage, and we'll just set it to 10 by default. And then in our enter function on our melee attack state, we will say attack details dot damage amount equals state data dot attack damage, like that. Then we can also set the position, so attack details dot position equals entity dot alive game object dot transform dot position. Perfect. So now we just need to change it on our player combat controller as well. So we have our private float attack details. Let's just change this to attack details, like that. We can get rid of this. And now where we set the attack details down here, we can just say attack details dot damage amount equals attack 1 damage. and attack details dot position equals transform dot position, like that. So of course this is now going to break it for our dummy again. We'll fix that in just a second. But now I also need to make it so that when our enemy gets damaged, it'll use this format. So let's come to our damage function. So now instead of taking in an array of floats, we also want to take in an attack details data type. And we're going to decrease our health not by attack details 0, but instead attack details dot damage amount. And then we can just change this to attack details dot position dot x instead. That should work. And that's basically almost everything we need. Now we just need to create the enemy specific melee attack state class and set up the transitions, and of course the animations as well. So let's go back to Unity and let's go to our enemies folder, enemy specific, enemy1, and let's create a new C# script called E1 underscore melee attack state, like that, and open it up. We can get rid of this code, make it inherit from melee attack state this time, generate the constructor, and we want to get a reference to our enemy1. So we'll say private enemy1, call it enemy, and let's add it to our constructor. So enemy1 called enemy, add it to the constructor, this dot enemy equals enemy, like that. And let's get the function overrides. We don't want the first 3, click OK. Cool. So now basically all we need to do is create the transitions out of our attack state. So we can come to our logic update function and we can say if is animation finished. That means we know the attack is done. Let's transition somewhere else. So let's go take a look at our state machine diagram. And you can see when the attack is finished, we're either going to transition to look for player if we can no longer detect the player, or we're going to transition to player detected if the player is still in the aggro range. So we need to come back to our scripts. And actually, now that I think about it, in our attack state, we should probably check to see if the player is within the min aggro range. So let's create another protected boolean called is player in min aggro range, like that. Add it to our checks. So is player in min aggro range equals entity dot check player in min aggro range, like that. And now in our E1 melee attack state, we can say if is player in min aggro range, then state machine dot change state to enemy dot player detected state, like that. Else we want to go to our look for player state. So state machine dot change state to enemy dot look for player state, like that. Cool, that should be everything set up in this enemy specific class. Now we just need to transition to this class. So let's look at our to-do window. And we have these two transitions over here. So let's just click on this one. And actually we can't do this yet because we still need to initialize the attack on our enemy script. So let's come to our Enemy1 class. And let's create a public E1 underscore melee attack state. And we'll just call it melee attack state, like that. Then create the public getter and the private setter. And then let's get the data. So serialize field, private d underscore melee attack. And we'll just call it melee attack state data, like that. And now let's call the constructor. So melee attack state equals a new E1 underscore melee attack state. We'll pass this as the entity, state machine as the state machine. The animation boolean name is just going to be melee attack, like that. Now we need our attack position transform. So this we're going to declare on our enemy. So we can create another serialized field that is going to be a private transform, and we'll just call it melee attack position, like that. We'll pass that through with the constructor. Next we need our state data, so melee attack state data, and then finally we'll pass this through as our enemy1. Now if we come to our to-do list and we go to the first one, we can add this transition. So in here we want to say if perform close range action, then state machine dot change state to enemy dot melee attack state, like that. And then we just change this to an else if. Now we can go to our other to do and basically do the exact same thing. So let's just add it at the start as well. So we'll say if perform close range action, then state machine dot change state to our enemy dot melee attack state. Change this to else if, and then get rid of the to do. And that should be it for the code. We'll see. Now let's head back to Unity. Let's start off by creating the attack animation. So let's pull up our animation window and let's click on our alive game object and then go create new clip, navigate to our animations folder, and we'll just call it enemy1 underscore melee attack, like that. Let's go to our sprites folder and our enemies folder. So frames 12 to frame 17. Yeah, 12 to 17 is our attack animation. So we can play that. A sample rate of 60 is way too fast. Let's change that to 15 and see what it looks like. Cool. That looks quite good. Let's see if we can make it a little bit better. Seeing as it's an enemy, it doesn't have to attack as quickly. So we can maybe have it hold this position a little bit longer. Maybe 3 frames like that. That looks quite good. And then let's make it so it holds this position for an extra frame. Like that. That looks quite good. Okay, so we have our melee attack animation now. We can get rid of the animation window. Let's go to our animator, and here is our melee attack animation state. Let's start off by creating the bool parameter, which is melee attack, like that. And we want to transition to the melee attack from our player detected and our charge state. So let's create those transitions, first from player detected to melee attack. Click on the transition and make sure has exit time is unticked. Change the transition duration to 0 and then add the 2 conditions. The first condition is player detected is false. The second one is melee attack is true. Next we have our transition from charge to melee attack. Make sure has exit time is not ticked. Set the transition duration to 0. Add the 2 conditions. The first one this time is charge is false and melee attack is true. So now once we finish the melee attack, we either want to transition to look for player or player detected. So we'll make a transition back to player detected. Untick has exit time. Transition duration is 0. Add the 2 conditions. The first one is melee attack is false. The second one is player detected is true. And then we make a transition from here to look for player. Move this a little bit. Click on the transition. Has exit time is false. Transition duration is 0. Add the 2 conditions. First condition, melee attack is false. And the second one is look for player is true. And that should be everything. Okay, next let's come to our alive game object and create a new empty child. And we'll call it melee attack position. like that. Click on Enemy1, and let's just drag this into the slot before we forget. Let's just move it into a better position. We can't see the radius, so we should probably go and create a gizmo for that. So let's head back to our code. Let's come to our Enemy1 script. And let's create the draw gizmos function at the bottom. So public override void on draw gizmos, like that. And let's just go to our entity class and make sure that our on draw gizmos is a virtual void. Perfect. Okay. And now in here we can just say gizmos.draw wire sphere, and we want to draw it on melee attack position, and the radius is melee attack state data dot attack radius, like that. And then go to our d_melee attack class, and we just need to make it so that we can create the asset. So let's go to another state data class and copy this, come back here, paste it in, and the file name is going to be a new melee attack state data, and we'll just call it melee attack state, like that. Save that, and then when we go back to Unity, we can now go to our Enemy1 data folder and say create data, state data, melee attack state. And we'll just call it E1_ melee attack data, like that. While we're clicking on it, let's change what is player to player. And then let's click on Enemy1 and drag this in, like that. So now we can see where our attack is. So I'm just going to move it around a little bit more. I'll put it around here. We can actually click on our animation window and then go to our melee attack and run through it. And here we can see what the attack looks like. So now we can try and line this up a bit better. I'm just going to increase the radius of the attack a little bit. So let's say 0.75. And then move it around here. Like that. Perfect. Okay, now we just need to make sure that we actually call the trigger and finish attack functions from our state. So let's click on our alive game object and let's add a component, and this is the animation to state machine script. Now if we go to our melee attack animation, we can add our animation events. So we want to call the trigger attack at this position of the animation. So we can just click on add event, and the function we want to call is trigger attack. And then at the very end, we want to add another event. And this time we want to call finish attack. So everything should work now. Let's test it out. Fingers crossed. So when our enemy detects us, he's going to run at us and he's going to get stuck. Okay, so let's debug and find out what's happening. So when we run this, we can see that our enemy is working fine. He detects us. And now when he gets close enough, he's not transitioning to the attack state. Let's take a look at the animator. We're still in the charge state. Our melee attack is set to true. Is our conditions here wrong? Okay. So let's see if this was the issue. Let's go to our animator. On this transition, this has to be melee attack, not look for player. If we run the game now, let's hope it works. Boom, there you go. So the enemy attacks us sometimes. So as you can see, it basically works. We just need to fine tune the variables and like the check distances and things a little bit. So let's make it so we can see what our close range and long range action distances are. So let's go to our scripts and let's go to entity. And in our onDrawGizmos function, let's start off by saying gizmos.draw wire sphere. And we're going to draw it on our player check.position plus, then we'll say vector 3, because we need to cast it as a vector 3. And we're adding our check distance to this. So in here we'll say alive go.transform.right multiplied with our entity data dot close range action distance. Like that. And I should set the radius to something like 0.2. We don't need this here. Okay, like that. So what we're saying is we're going to look at the player check position, and then we're just going to add to our right of the enemy the close range action distance. Let's do the same for our aggro distances. So let's just copy this and paste it twice. And so instead of close range action distance, we're going to use our min aggro distance and our max aggro distance. Like that. I hope that makes sense. I don't feel like I explained that very well, but basically we're just going to our player check position and then going to the right or left, depending on what direction the enemy is facing, these distances, and drawing a little sphere. So if we go back to Unity, we won't be able to see that until we run the game. But as you can see, if we just pause this, we have these little spheres that represent the different distances. Now, the nice thing about using those scriptable objects for these distances is we can change these during runtime and they will save. So when we stop playing the game, these will stay at the same position. So if we come to our Enemy1 game object and then go to our Enemy1 data class, let's increase our max aggro distance to like 8 and the min aggro distance to 7, like that, just so we have the little buffer zone. And then our close range action distance is a bit too close. I think I want to make it over here so that we will attack just at the tip. So let's try 2. That's too much. 1.5, 1.75. That looks good. So now if we run the game, it's going to charge at us again. He ran past us. So it seems like we still have a couple of issues. What is this? So we're getting this error because we're trying to use a live game object in our onDraw gizmos, but we don't have a reference to it yet because we only set the reference in start. So instead of this, let's use vector2.right. Like that. That should get rid of that error. Cool, so we don't have any other errors. So now let's try and figure out why our enemy is running past us. So he charged for a little bit and stops like he's supposed to, because we did change the time to a number that's quite low. Okay, and now he attacks us. Why is he running past us? Okay, so there's something wrong in our charge state. Let's go look at our charge state. So it doesn't look like anything's wrong in our charge state itself. Let's go to our E1 charge state. Okay, so here's the issue. This is my bad. So currently we can only transition to our melee attack state if the charge time is over, which is not correct. So we can take this if statement, cut it out, and we'll put it at the very front. And then we'll say else if we're detecting a ledge or a wall, and then else if the charge time is over. Now in here, we're saying when the charge time is over, if the player is in the min aggro range, go to the player detected state. So we can get rid of this else, like that. And then afterwards we can say else. So if the player is not in the min aggro range, so we're not detecting the player, state machine dot change state to enemy dot look for player. Like that. Okay, let's see if that fixed it. So when the enemy sees us, cool. So I don't think he's gonna run past us this time. Awesome. And as you can see, our enemy can still kill us. So this is giving a lot more life to our enemy. Now we just need to get it to feel a little bit better by messing around with our transitions between states and maybe adding some different checks. But for now, I think we'll call it good. So we cannot yet damage our enemy. We're going to leave that for the next video. We can also not damage our dummy anymore because we changed our attack details to use the struct. So I'm not going to fix that. I'll leave that as a challenge to you guys, and I'll fix it in the next video. But for now, I hope you guys are enjoying this series as much as I am. It's really fun seeing this enemy come to life, and as we keep going, his behavior will become better and better, and he won't do things like this where he stands on a ledge just looking at us. So next time we're going to make it so that we can actually damage the enemy, and we'll take a look at this stun state. So if we damage the enemy a certain amount of times, he will get stunned and he can't do anything else for a certain amount of time, and then eventually we can kill him. And that should be the end for our first enemy. Then we can move on to our second enemy, the archer, and I'm so excited to show you guys how easy it is to make the second enemy. But for now, I would just like to thank all my supporters and wonderful people on Patreon, and a huge special thanks to Lewis for your support on Patreon. I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.